The night I realized she was going to destroy me, she poured the wine herself and smiled like nothing had changed. I remember watching her hands, steady, practiced, familiar, thinking how many rooms we had controlled together with those hands resting calmly on a table. I thought betrayal would feel loud when it came. I thought it would arrive with anger or panic or guilt. Instead, it arrived as certainty. She already knew how this would end. She had known long before I did, and the truth I'm still learning to live with is this. I didn't lose because I trusted the wrong person. I lost because I taught the right one exactly how to take me apart. There are stories we tell in public and stories we only tell to the people closest to us. Step inside the inner circle. People think high-end real estate is marble and skyline views and champagne at ribbon cuttings. It isn't. It's leverage. It's who gets a call returned and who doesn't. It's how quickly a zoning concern becomes a community partnership. It's which contractor suddenly finds their permits delayed and which one gets fast-tracked because the right name was mentioned in the right hallway. Our business wasn't buildings. It was momentum. Hale Mercer Group started with me. My last name on the first set of incorporation papers, my signature on the first private loan, my personal guarantees that could have ended me if we'd missed a single deadline. I was the one who could walk into a room of lenders and make them feel safe while I asked for everything. Then Evelyn arrived and made the rooms feel inevitable. She wasn't just smart. She was surgical. She could read ambition in people the way some people read weather. She knew which billionaire wanted admiration disguised as privacy, which council member wanted community impact without losing face, which broker would betray anyone for the right invitation. When she spoke, people leaned in. When I spoke, people calculated. Together, we were irresistible. The press called us a power couple long before we ever corrected them. At first, I found it annoying, too personal, too simplified. But Evelyn understood something I didn't. Perception is an asset. She didn't fight the label. She polished it. She made sure we appeared together at the right events, laughed at the right jokes, didn't contradict each other in public. She trained our senior team to route decisions through the partnership, even when the decision was mine. It makes them feel stability, she'd say, like the building already exists before we pour the foundation. That line worked on investors, it worked on clients, it even worked on me, because I wanted to believe we were aligned, not romantically, people always assume that part, but strategically. The kind of alignment that lets you sleep at night knowing the person beside you wants the same future. The truth is, we did want the same future. We just wanted to sit in different seats when we got there. Evelyn hated being second in a way she never admitted out loud. Not with tantrums, not with drama, with refinement, with quiet correction. If someone praised me too strongly at an event, she'd tell a story later that re-centered the accomplishment without seeming defensive. If a client called me the brain, she'd laugh and say, "He likes numbers, I like people. That's why it works." And suddenly, the room would nod as if she'd translated my value into something smaller. I noticed these things. I just didn't name them as threats, because she never threatened me directly. She made other people do it for her. When we bought the Riverton Tower, our first truly public acquisition, Evelyn insisted on hosting the investor dinner in our penthouse showroom before we even finished construction. She wanted them standing inside possibility. She wanted them seeing the city through floor-to-ceiling glass while she spoke about legacy as if she owned the concept. That night, an older investor pulled me aside and said, "She's going to run this place one day." I laughed, because what else do you do when someone says something that feels like a prophecy? Evelyn heard him. I know she did. She smiled and lifted her glass, like the comment had been a compliment to both of us. On paper, our roles were clear. I handled capital, negotiations, government touchpoints. She handled brand, design influence, high net worth relationships. In reality, Evelyn handled whatever she could reach first, and she could reach almost anything, especially people. I didn't fear her. I respected her. I relied on her. I told myself that was the same thing. It's easy to confuse those when your life is built on momentum and your days are measured in signatures. Then the consolidation opportunity arrived, the one deal big enough to turn us from operators into an institution, and I learned what Evelyn had been practicing the entire time: how to make a takeover feel like teamwork, how to sharpen a knife while smiling, how to backstab someone without ever leaving fingerprints, and how to do it so cleanly that everyone else thanks you for the lesson. The email didn't look dramatic. That's how the important ones always arrive. Subject line: exploring strategic alignment. Confidential. A sovereign-backed capital group wanted to consolidate trophy residential assets across 3 cities. Not just buy, control. They wanted zoning cooperation, quiet political assurances, and a managing partner who could keep their name out of headlines while moving billions efficiently. They wanted one voice. Evelyn and I sat across from each other in the glass conference room, the city stacked behind her like a backdrop she'd chosen deliberately. I laid out the terms on the table between us, paper still warm from the printer. "They're not looking for operators," I said. "They're looking for authority." Evelyn skimmed the first page without touching it. She didn't need the details yet. She was listening to tone. "And they want you," she said, not asking. "They want a single managing partner," I corrected. "I can structure the capital stack. I know the regulators. I've already spoken to 2 council offices." She tilted her head, studying me the way she did when she was deciding how much truth to reveal. "So you'll be the face." "For them?" I said. "For this?" A pause, not long. Just enough. "Of course," she said. "It makes sense." The speed of her agreement should have unsettled me. Instead, it felt like relief. We had avoided the argument before it started. I told myself that was maturity. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Design authority, brand cohesion, high net worth buy-in," I said. "They'll want to feel inevitability, not aggression." She smiled. "I can do inevitability." The first joint call with the fund went smoothly. I led. Evelyn reinforced. She spoke sparingly, strategically, only when her voice would carry more weight than mine. When the fund's representative asked about succession planning, she laughed lightly and said, "Marcus hates that question. He likes to build as if he'll live forever." They laughed. They liked her. After the call, she touched my arm. "You were solid," she said. "They trust you." I felt a quiet pride, not ego, belonging. Over the next week, the deal accelerated. Site visits, private dinners, quiet assurances exchanged in hallways that never appeared on calendars. I brought Evelyn into meetings when optics mattered. She deferred to me in public and added polish in private. Then small things began to happen. A dinner with 2 of the fund's senior advisors was moved from my calendar to hers. "They wanted design insight," she said. "I didn't think you'd want to sit through it." A draft governance memo arrived with her annotations already incorporated. "I streamlined it," she said. "Too many cooks scare them." An internal meeting I'd scheduled with our legal team went ahead without me. Evelyn summarized it afterward in bullet points. "Nothing you need to worry about. Nothing I need to worry about." That phrase lodged somewhere uncomfortable. I raised it once gently over coffee in the office kitchen. "Feels like I'm getting bypassed." She didn't get defensive. That's what made it effective. "You're leading," she said. "I'm supporting." Supporting doesn't mean waiting to be asked. There was logic in that, enough to quiet me. Still, I started to notice how people spoke around her. How junior staff checked her reactions before committing. How partners started saying, "Evelyn mentioned," as a way of softening disagreement with me. During one late-night walkthrough of a development site, a contractor said, "She's the one we should really be listening to, right?" He laughed after saying it, like it was a joke. Evelyn laughed too. I did not. I told myself this was normal friction, that big deals warp dynamics, that once the structure was finalized, everything would settle back into place. I believed that because believing anything else would mean admitting the foundation was already shifting. The fund requested a final proposal: one managing partner, one signature authority, one clear line of command. I prepared the documents myself. Evelyn reviewed them in silence. When she handed them back, she said, "This will work." She didn't say whose version of work she meant. I sent the proposal. 2 days later, the fund accepted. The congratulatory messages poured in. Staff clapped in the hallway. Investors sent notes about legacy and scale and vision. That night, Evelyn opened a bottle of wine without asking. "To the future," she said, raising her glass. "To alignment," I replied. She smiled at me in a way that felt genuine. That was the moment the trap closed. I just didn't hear it. Success changes how people listen. Before the announcement, I spoke, and people evaluated. After it, they interpreted. They tried to read what mattered more: my words or Evelyn's silence while I spoke. It started with staff. A senior analyst asked Evelyn for approval on a financing model I had already signed off on. When I corrected him, he apologized to both of us, eyes flicking between our faces, as if he was waiting to see which correction would stick. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. At the next leadership meeting, someone presented a timeline that moved one of our developments forward by 6 months. I hadn't approved it. The assumptions were aggressive, risky. I asked where it came from. "Evelyn thought the market would respond better if we showed momentum," the presenter said. Evelyn smiled. "Only as a scenario. We can walk it back." But it was already in the room, already shaping expectations. That was her method. Introduce the idea lightly. Let others defend it. Then step back and appear reasonable. I confronted her that evening in my office, the lights low, the city blinking outside the windows. "You're changing direction without looping me in," I said. She didn't deny it. She sighed, like I was exhausting. "You're stretched thin," she said. "This deal is bigger than anything we've done. People need decisions faster than you're comfortable making them." "That's not your call," I said. She met my gaze calmly. "It is if I'm the one they're turning to?" That was the first time she said it out loud. Not as an accusation, as a fact. I should have pushed harder then. I should have drawn a line. Instead, I tried to reassert control quietly, rerouting approvals, tightening reporting lines, reminding people of formal authority. It backfired. People began treating me like an obstacle instead of a leader. Requests came later. Information arrived filtered. Conversations ended just before I entered rooms. Evelyn, meanwhile, remained warm, approachable, steady. She told people, "Marcus is under pressure. We're supporting him." Supporting him. The phrase made my skin crawl. At a private dinner with 2 city officials, one of them asked, "Who's actually steering this ship day to day?" I smiled, professional. "I am." Evelyn touched my arm. "We are," she said softly. The official nodded, reassured, but the correction wasn't for him, it was for me. I started to feel like I was being managed. I tried to talk to her about it once more, carefully, as if words themselves were volatile. "This is starting to feel like erosion," I said. She laughed lightly. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being observant." "You're being threatened," she replied. "And I get it. You're used to being the gravitational center." That sentence was a knife disguised as insight. Are you doing this deliberately? I asked. She looked almost amused. Do you really think I'd need to? I slept poorly that week, not because of stress, but because of clarity pressing against denial. I replayed conversations. I noticed patterns. How often her suggestions became decisions without fingerprints. How often I was framed as cautious, while she was framed as visionary. At the office, people still deferred to me formally, but their instincts had shifted, and instinct is where power lives. The fund scheduled a governance alignment call. I assumed I would lead it. The invite listed Evelyn as the primary presenter. I stared at my screen longer than necessary. When I brought it up, she said, "They asked for me." Why? "Because I speak their language now," she said. "You taught me how." There it was. The truth slipped out without cruelty, without apology. I realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a misalignment. It was a transition, and I was on the wrong side of it. Still, I told myself this was temporary, that once the deal stabilized, roles would reset. That belief was the last thing keeping me compliant. And Evelyn knew it, because she was already preparing the moment when belief would no longer be enough. The reconciliation came disguised as generosity. Evelyn suggested we take a weekend away. No phones, no staff, no agendas. "We've been living inside this deal," she said. "We need to reset before it consumes us." The suggestion felt reasonable, even caring. We drove north to a lake property one of our investors kept empty most of the year. Glass walls, still water, the kind of quiet that makes you believe problems can't survive there. That first night she cooked. She hadn't done that in months. She poured wine carefully, the way she always did when she wanted control without tension. We sat across from each other at the long wooden table, the city replaced by darkness and reflected stars. "I know I've been pushing," she said. "I know it's felt like I was sidelining you." I didn't answer right away. I was too busy absorbing the relief of hearing the words at all. "I'm not trying to take this from you," she continued. "I'm trying to protect it. You and the company." "You could have talked to me," I said. She nodded. "You're right, I should have." That admission, simple, unforced, hit me harder than any argument would have. It felt like ground returning under my feet. "I don't want to compete with you," she said. "I want us aligned again." Aligned. The words still worked on me. We spent the next day walking the property, talking about future projects, laughing in the way people do when they believe they've survived something together. She asked my opinion, deferred in small, visible ways, told stories that centered my leadership. I watched myself relax. That night, she suggested we formalize things. For clarity, she said, a revised internal structure that clarified roles without changing ownership. "People are confused," she said. "This will settle them." We spread the documents across the table. I read them carefully. Everything looked balanced, shared oversight, clear domains. "Nothing changes," she said. "This just puts words to what we already do." I signed. That signature would come back later, sharp and unmistakable. The following week, the office felt calmer. People stopped whispering. Decisions flowed smoothly again. Evelyn copied me on emails she didn't need to, asked for my sign-off even when it wasn't required. I let myself believe the storm had passed. The fund's representatives sent a note thanking us for clear leadership. They mentioned Evelyn by name, but they mentioned me first. That detail mattered more than it should have. At a public event celebrating the new partnership, Evelyn stood beside me and said, "None of this happens without Marcus." The applause felt real. I told myself I had misread her intentions. That power had made me paranoid. That ambition didn't have to be zero-sum. That belief bought her time. 2 weeks later, I received an email from legal asking me to review a finalized governance packet before it went to the fund. I opened it casually. Then I noticed something off. A clause referencing the weekend agreement, a clause I hadn't scrutinized closely enough. It reframed shared oversight into operational delegation. It converted clarity into hierarchy. Evelyn's role expanded quietly. Mine narrowed just enough to be defensible. When I called her, she answered immediately. "Relax," she said. "It's standard language." "It isn't," I replied. "It shifts authority." She paused. Not long, just long enough to register annoyance. "You signed the framework," she said. "This is just execution. You told me nothing would change?" "And it hasn't," she replied calmly. "You're still here. You're still important." Important, not essential. That was the word she chose. I felt the false resolution dissolve in real time, the way ice cracks silently before it gives way. "You planned this," I said. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She said, "I stabilized us." I hung up without responding. That night, I stayed late at the office, alone, watching the city move beneath me the way it always had. For the first time, the skyline didn't feel like something I controlled. It felt like something watching. And I understood then that the weekend hadn't been reconciliation. It had been positioning. She hadn't repaired the partnership. She had finished measuring it. I didn't confront her again right away. That was my mistake. Instead, I did what I've always done when something feels wrong. I audited the system. I pulled contracts, governance drafts, side letters. I asked questions that sounded routine. I watched who answered quickly and who didn't. The pattern emerged fast once I knew how to look. Evelyn had been meeting privately with the fund's operational team for months, not updates, strategy. She positioned herself as continuity, someone who could protect the vision if leadership ever became unstable. Unstable. That word appeared in a memo I was never meant to see. It wasn't written by her. That was the point. She had let others arrive at it on their own. I found emails where she framed my caution as risk sensitivity, where she praised my discipline while quietly implying it limited growth. She never attacked me directly. She curated doubt and let it ferment. Then I found the side agreement, a performance-based control clause triggered by strategic misalignment, vague enough to be flexible, specific enough to be enforceable. It named her as the authority empowered to act in the company's best interest. Best interest is a weapon when no one agrees on whose. The clause had been approved by legal, by the fund, by two board members who trusted Evelyn because she'd been the one walking them through everything while I focused on capital. I realized then that the managing partner title hadn't been the prize. It had been the distraction. The real takeover had happened in conversations I wasn't in, framed as concern, executed as preparation. When I finally confronted her, it wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. I laid the documents on the table between us, no accusation, no raised voice. "You planned this," I said. She glanced at the papers unimpressed. "I prepared for inevitability. You undermined me." "I insulated the company," she corrected. "You replaced me." She met my gaze without blinking. "You were replaceable." The cruelty wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was delivered with precision, the way you state a fact that doesn't require debate. "I built this," I said. "You built the first version," she replied. "I evolved it." I felt something harden in my chest, not anger, not shock, recognition. "You used me," I said. She smiled thinly. "You used me too. I just learned faster." That was the moment the betrayal became undeniable, not because of the contracts, but because of her certainty. There was no guilt to negotiate with, no remorse to exploit. This wasn't a lapse. It was a philosophy. "You could have done this together," I said. She shook her head. "Together is inefficient. Someone always hesitates." "And you decided that was me." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I stood gathering the papers. You think this ends cleanly? I said. It won't. Evelyn leaned back, folding her hands calmly. It will for me. As I left the room, I understood the true shape of what she'd done. She hadn't just taken power. She had rewritten the story so that when I resisted, I would look unstable. When I fought back, I would look emotional. And when I left, it would look mutual. That's the kind of betrayal that doesn't just remove you from the room. It teaches everyone else how not to become you. For a brief, dangerous stretch of time, I believed I could still win. Not publicly, not emotionally, structurally. I told myself that what Evelyn had done was aggressive, but incomplete. That power, once taken, still had to be maintained. That the same system she'd used to edge me out could be reversed with patience and precision. That belief was comforting. It gave me something to do other than admit I'd already lost ground. I began quietly reconnecting with relationships she couldn't fully replace. Old lenders who trusted my instincts. Municipal contacts who remembered what I'd delivered when projects stalled. A former board advisor who owed me a favor from years ago. I didn't frame it as a counterattack. I framed it as stabilization. That language still worked on me. At the office, I became careful, deliberate. I stopped pushing back in meetings and started asking questions instead. Questions that forced people to explain assumptions out loud. Questions that slowed momentum just enough to create friction. Evelyn noticed immediately. "You've gone quiet," she said one evening, as we reviewed numbers side by side. "I'm listening," I replied. She smiled faintly. "That can be useful, or it can be obstructive. Depends on what you're building," I said. She looked at me then. Really looked, and for the first time I saw irritation flash beneath her composure. "Be careful," she said. "You're not as indispensable as you think." There it was again. Replaceable. I told myself she was bluffing. I began drafting contingency memos, documents that outlined alternative governance interpretations, risk exposure scenarios, exit pathways for capital partners if authority became too centralized. Nothing overt, nothing accusatory, just enough to remind the board that concentration of control had consequences. I shared one of them with a senior advisor over lunch. He skimmed it, then leaned back and said, "This reads like someone preparing for a fight they've already lost." I laughed lightly. "I'm preparing for options." He studied me. "Options require leverage. What leverage do you think you still have?" I didn't answer immediately. That silence told him everything. Still, I pushed forward. I requested a formal review of governance execution, citing alignment checks. I suggested a pause on further authority expansion until the fund's next quarter. I framed it as prudence. Evelyn countered with grace. She agreed publicly, then privately accelerated timelines. She spoke to the fund about Marcus's understandable adjustment period. She reassured them she was handling it, handling me. The realization crept in slowly. Every move I made was already anticipated. I was playing chess against someone who had memorized my openings. One afternoon, a board member pulled me aside. "You seem unsettled," he said gently. "This deal has been intense." "I'm fine," I replied. He nodded, unconvinced. "Evelyn's been very steady. It's been reassuring." Reassuring, that word again. I started to recognize the pattern not just in her behavior, but in how people spoke about us. I was described as visionary, but volatile. She was described as grounded and strategic. I was associated with ambition, she with continuity. She hadn't destroyed my credibility. She had reframed it. And that's far more dangerous. At home, the silence between us grew heavier. We no longer pretended things were normal. We existed in parallel, shared spaces, separate strategies. One night I confronted her again, not with documents this time, but with honesty. You don't need me anymore? I said. She didn't deny it. I outgrew you. The words were precise, deliberate, cruel. I made you, I said. She smiled, slow and measured. You platformed me. I made myself. I felt something fracture then, not my pride, but my understanding of who she had been to me. You could have told me, I said. You could have walked away clean. That would have been inefficient, she replied, and you would have resisted. I am resisting. She tilted her head. No, you're adjusting. That was the moment I understood the final layer of her cruelty. She wasn't just taking power. She was teaching me to accept it, to rationalize, to minimize, to internalize the idea that my displacement was logical, deserved, inevitable. I left that conversation with a strange calm, not because I felt hopeful, because I felt clarity. If I continued trying to preserve what we had, she would continue erasing me carefully, professionally, and completely. There was only one way to stop that, not by winning, but by breaking the illusion that this transition was smooth. I went back to my office and opened the folder I'd been avoiding, the one labeled contingencies. Inside were the materials that could force the truth into the open, not all at once, not explosively, but in a way that would demand attention. She moved first. That was the part I hadn't anticipated, not because I underestimated her, but because I believed she would wait, that she would let me exhaust myself with restraint while she stood still and let gravity do the rest. Instead, she accelerated. The board call was scheduled as a routine quarterly update. No agenda changes. No warning. I joined from my office, coffee untouched, notes arranged with the care of someone still pretending preparation mattered. Evelyn joined from the main conference room. She was already there when the call opened, seated at the head of the table, her posture relaxed. A legal counsel beside her I hadn't been told would attend. That was when I knew. The fund's representative spoke first. Before we begin, he said, we need to address an internal alignment matter. Evelyn didn't look at me. She didn't need to. He continued. Recent communications have raised concerns about leadership continuity. To protect the investment, we've agreed to implement the governance safeguards outlined in the side agreement. The side agreement. I watched faces on the screen shift subtly. Concern, curiosity, relief. No one looked surprised enough. Evelyn finally spoke. This isn't punitive, she said gently. It's precautionary. Marcus has been under extraordinary pressure. We want to ensure stability. Stability, there it was again. I opened my mouth to speak, but the legal counsel cut in smoothly. For clarity, operational authority will temporarily consolidate under Evelyn's direction while strategic review continues. Temporarily, a word designed to soothe while it closes doors. I realized then what she'd done. She hadn't just prepared for resistance, she had prepared witnesses, every doubt she'd seeded, every quiet conversation, every careful framing. This was the harvest. When the moment came, no one needed convincing. They needed permission, and she gave it to them. I spoke anyway. This review is based on incomplete information. Evelyn turned toward me for the first time. Her expression was calm, almost sympathetic. This is exactly what we mean, she said. Defensive, reactive. This isn't about blame. No, it was about narrative. The call ended quickly after that. Decisions framed as protections. Language chosen to sound temporary while behaving permanent. When the screen went dark, I sat alone, the silence ringing louder than any argument would have. Minutes later, Evelyn appeared in my doorway. You didn't have to do it like that, I said. She regarded me evenly. I did? You set me up? She nodded once. You were always going to resist. I needed the resistance to be visible. So, you could label it instability. So others could, she corrected. I just made sure they saw it. I felt a sharp, bitter clarity settle in. You weaponized me, I said. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I used what you gave me, she said. Your pride, your caution, your need to be seen as reasonable. I laughed once, short and humorless. You're ruthless. She didn't flinch. I'm effective. Then she said the line that finally stripped away any remaining illusion. I never needed you to fail. I just needed you to hesitate. That was the true betrayal. Not the contracts, not the meetings. The fact that she had studied me closely enough to know exactly where I would slow down, and built her entire strategy around that knowledge. She turned to leave, then paused. You taught me everything about power, she said. I just believed you meant it. The door closed softly behind her, and in that silence, I understood something that burned far worse than loss. She hadn't taken my place. She had used me as the prototype. I had one advantage left, not authority, not access, memory. The kind of memory that lives in inboxes no one audits, and side conversations no one documents. The kind you accumulate when you build something from the ground up and learn which assurances were ever real. Evelyn assumed I would retreat quietly. She had structured everything to make that option look dignified. A strategic advisory role, a severance package wrapped in gratitude, press language that framed my exit as evolution. She underestimated one thing. I wasn't interested in dignity. I opened the contingency folder again, this time without hesitation. Inside were emails, recorded calls, draft agreements that never made it to final execution because I'd advised against them. Notes from meetings where regulatory boundaries were discussed casually, with the assumption that discretion was protection. None of it was explosive on its own. Together, it formed a pattern. I didn't send it to the press. That would have been emotional, predictable, easy to discredit. I sent it to the fund's compliance team, quietly, precisely, with a cover note that contained only facts and timestamps. No accusations, no commentary, just enough to force review. Then I sent a second message to the board's independent advisor, flagging a potential exposure issue that required immediate attention. Within 48 hours, capital movements slowed. Within 72, questions began circulating that Evelyn could not pre-answer. She called me that night. You crossed a line, she said, voice tight for the first time since I'd known her. You drew it, I replied. You're burning the company? I'm forcing the truth into the room, I said. You just don't control it anymore. There was silence on the line. Real silence, not strategic. You won't come out of this clean, she said finally. I already didn't, I replied. The fund announced a temporary pause pending review. Not public, not dramatic, just enough to fracture the illusion of seamless control. Board members started asking questions they hadn't asked before. Legal teams began rereading clauses they'd skimmed. The empire didn't collapse, but it stopped growing. And in our world, momentum is survival. I was removed formally 2 weeks later. The language was polite, the handshake professional. Evelyn did not attend the meeting. That absence told me everything. I walked out of the building I'd helped design, my badge deactivated, my name still etched into the lobby wall in brushed steel. I didn't feel victory. I felt permanence. Because whatever came next, for her, for the company, for me, would now carry the weight of something that couldn't be undone. I had broken the spell, and spells once broken never return quietly. The weeks that followed were outwardly calm. That was Evelyn's preference. The fund issued a neutral statement about temporary review procedures. The board emphasized continuity. Staff were reminded gently not to speculate. My departure was framed as strategic recalibration, mutual respect, long-term alignment. Every word was chosen to sound like nothing had happened. Inside the company, though, everything shifted. Meetings slowed. Decisions that once took hours now took days. People stopped assuming. They started documenting. Compliance asked questions they'd never bothered with before. Legal inserted itself into conversations that used to end with a handshake. Momentum, the invisible engine of our empire, stalled. I watched it happen from a distance, through calls with old contacts and careful updates from people who still trusted me enough to be honest. Evelyn remained in control, but it was no longer effortless. Every move required justification. Every confidence check came with a margin of doubt she couldn't smooth away. She had won authority. She had lost inevitability. Once, a former partner met me for coffee and said, "You broke something." I nodded. That was the point. He studied me. "You didn't get anything back." "I wasn't trying to," I said. Privately, the cost settled in quieter ways. My phone stopped ringing the way it used to. Invitations thinned. People who once treated me like gravity now treated me like a risk factor they didn't need to test. Power is loyal to momentum, not history. At night, I replayed the last conversation with Evelyn, the calm in her voice, when she thought she'd sealed the narrative. I wondered if she ever felt fear when the fund paused, when questions surfaced, when control stopped feeling automatic. I doubted it. Fear wasn't her weakness. Exposure was. Months later, I saw her at an industry event, across the room, surrounded by people who still wanted something from her. She looked composed, untouched. When our eyes met, she gave me a small nod. Not apology, not regret, acknowledgement, as if to say you did what you could, and so did I. I left early, not because I couldn't stand to be there, but because staying would have meant pretending the story was still unfinished. It wasn't. The empire survived, reduced, but intact. The fund adjusted. New safeguards layered in. The narrative settled into something manageable. And I learned something I hadn't understood before. Sometimes the only leverage you get is the chance to slow someone down. Sometimes that has to be enough. People still ask me what went wrong. They phrase it carefully, like they're asking about a market downturn instead of a person. Was it timing? Was it strategy? Did the partnership just run its course? I give them answers that feel safe. I talk about growth curves and alignment issues. I talk about how businesses evolve faster than relationships. What I don't say is this: power couples don't break because of betrayal. They break because one person decides the partnership is a constraint. Evelyn never hated me. That would have been simpler. Hatred leaves traces. It leaks. What she felt was something cleaner and far more dangerous: assessment. She looked at me the way you look at an outdated system and ask how long you can afford to keep it running. I trusted her because she knew me. I mistook that knowledge for loyalty. She used it as a blueprint. I still think about the early days sometimes. The first deal, the first late-night walkthrough, the way we used to talk about the future, like it was something we were building together instead of something we were competing to control. I wonder when she made the decision, whether there was a single moment, or whether it accumulated quietly the way corrosion does. Maybe that part doesn't matter. What matters is this: I didn't lose because I wasn't strong enough. I lost because I believed power could be shared without being counted. She counted everything, every hesitation, every concession. Every moment I chose stability over dominance. By the time I understood the rules she was playing by, the game was already over. I don't regret forcing the truth into the room. I regret how long it took me to recognize that truth doesn't protect you unless you're willing to let it cost you something. The empire still stands. New deals rise, new names circulate. And somewhere inside those rooms, someone is being studied the way I was, measured not for their contribution, but for their replaceability. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't about trust or ambition or betrayal. It's about clarity. Power doesn't announce when it's done with you. It simply moves on. And if you don't move first, it will make sure you never do. If you enjoyed this story, you'll find more original stories on this channel. Like and subscribe to continue the journey, and I'll see you in the next one.